I love that you brought up the concept of 1,000 true fans because I did want to spend some time on that because it's a little spooky to me that the number is slightly over 1,000 kind of backers today. And it seems like this is your foray into being a creator. You're offering something on Kickstarter with a direct relationship to your audience. I'd love to explore a little bit more. You talked about that if you have direct contact and you're able to communicate directly with your audience, that 1,000 true fans works. But if you add all these intermediaries, it doesn't. Talk about that and give a little bit more color there because I think it's really interesting and is applicable today.
The premise, again, I first wrote about this in 2008 or so, and it was kind of a dawning idea that I had kind of carried around my head for a while, which is that this new technology, and at that time it wasn't really even social media, it was just the internet, it kind of disintermediated the audience and that you could communicate with them directly. And that if you kind of calculated how many fans you would need if you got all their money directly to you and you weren't paying anybody in between, if you imagined what I termed a true fan as somebody who was an avid true fan and bought whatever you produced. If you were a singer, they'd travel 200 miles to see you sing at a house concert. If you were an author, they'd buy the hard copy and the Audible and the paperback. If you were a photographer, they'd bought the signed print and your book, whatever. So there was this sense of they were being true fans. And if you could get $100 from them every year, if you produced enough, and $100 times 1,000, that's $100,000. That's a livelihood. It's not a fortune, but it's a livelihood for a creator. And of course, then there was the secondary kind of concentric circles of almost true fans and the other fans that would add to that. So that was the theory. And at the time I wrote it, there was very few examples that I could find of someone who originated in that. There were lots of examples in the 2008 of people who had kind of started off professionally and with the help of publishers or labels and had moved into depending on fan, but there wasn't anybody organically coming up only with 1,000 true fans. Since that time, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people who have done that, and partly because they're relying on social media, which came along and kind of facilitated that to a degree that I was maybe not even imagining. And so that's the premise, is that if you could get $100 from 1,000 fans, then you could make your living doing it. Now, if you're a duet, if you're a duo, if you've got a team, you've got to multiply that number by however. And the point that I always emphasize, and we were talking earlier about my Kickstarter full-time job, is that the cost of this method is that you have to give some of yourself to interact with your fans. You have to keep them happy. You have to engage with them. You have to deal with the problems and this stuff. And so it's another job. And not every creator either is wired to do this in terms of the personality or wants to do this. They may be a painter and says, I don't want to deal with fans. I just want to paint every day. Here's my agent. They're going to deal with it. I'll give you whatever it is that you want. I'll pay you. But I don't want to have to spend my day dealing with fans. And that's fine. That's legitimate. So I'm not suggesting that everybody do this way. I'm just saying this is an option for you. And as many things, there'll be hybrids. So I publish many things with a publisher from New York. I do self-publishing as well and everything in between. And so this is, for me, not the only option. This is one option, and it was a new option for me, and it's incredibly engaging and really fantastic, but it takes a lot of time, and so you have to be kind of ready for that.
I'm not too surprised to hear that. I was just going to add one other follow-on point too, which maybe you can add a little bit of color if this sparks any thoughts for you. But I read a fascinating article yesterday. I'm blanking on the name of the musician, but it was around this same concept. And basically it was the story of this female rock star who had previously released an album through a label and got about $52,000 in sales. And so anyone looking at her as an artist would think that an album for her is worth about $50,000. And the next time she inverted that model, did the direct to all of her fans model, and also adopted the kind of similar but different to Kickstarter where you have different scales, different prices at which people can back you.
Tiers. I think they call them tiers.
Tiers. It was similar to that, but I think it was more like the Radiohead kind of give your own price model. And she ended up releasing her next album, giving away a handful of things at different dollar values, and collecting over $1 million. So not only is it a way to engage directly with your fans and earn your livelihood off of them and kind of remove some intermediaries, but it can also just generate massively higher earnings because you're engaged with them and engage more emotionally.
Absolutely. I have publishing relationships with, say, well, now it's called Penguin Random House, I think. They've all kind of keep aggregating, and that's hard to keep track. But in any case, for a sale of a book, I might get $1 in royalties per book. So you have to sell a lot of books to see something substantial. Whereas if you were going to self-publish a book and then you could sell it for, I don't know, if you got even $20 a book after your expenses, that's huge compared to a royalty in New York. But again, it's another job. And so I actually, again, just being transparent, I actually try to have Vanishing Asia published again, not published, but have Taschen publish it again. They published my first book long ago, but they came back and said it was just going to be too expensive, even for them.
Just because it's a photo book, like a large format photo book.
Just how big it is and sort of the amount that they would have to charge for it. They felt that it wasn't going to work. And I actually went to a second art book publisher, Phaidon, who were very, very interested and again, very gracious, but they were saying the numbers just don't work for us. So I wanted to have them publish it because I wouldn't really get any money really from it, but I didn't want to have to work on a Kickstarter for 2 months full time. So yes, in the end, you can definitely maybe even do better, but you have to count your hours in some ways. Or if you do count your hours, you should put that into the equation. And for many people, especially when you're starting out, you don't have another option. And so this way of starting from the ground with your fans is really fantastic. And 1,000 is something where you can almost handle remembering everybody's names if you were really working at it and engaging with each one by one. And if you had 1,000, if you could gain one new fan a day, then it would just take you a couple of years to accumulate 1,000 of them. And I will say one other thing about this theory that I think is really kind of interesting, and that is that 1,000 true fans. So if you assume that that's possible, and again, it's not just Kickstarter, it's like Patreon. Again, I wrote the piece before Patreon kind of started, and Substack and all these things. There's lots of tools and mechanisms to do this. The next thing we're going to see very soon is a return to blogging with blogs that have a paywall that aren't individual one by one, because who wants to keep track of it, but having kind of, again, like a system-wide platform where you are basically paying to read people's work on a blog. When we have 1,000 true fans, what that means in today's world is that even if your idea is appealing to only 1 in a million people with a billion audience worldwide, that means you can have 1,000 true fans. There could be 1,000 people on the planet who will find every single weirdest, strangest idea that only appeals to 1 in a million people. So even if your thing only appeals to 1 in a million people, you can still find 1,000 of them on the planet. Now, that match, finding them or having them find you, that's the next set of tools that I think we're going to continue to develop over this next couple of decades. Is how do we make sure that you can find that person in Jakarta who is interested in your thing? How can they make sure that they know about it when everyone else in the world has something that they're making? And so that kind of matching problem is something that we can work on. But when that happens, I think then we'll really see the rise of the 1,000 true fans.
So it sounds like, from just your perspective, we're in the very early innings still of 1,000 true fans truly being a model that works globally, given people that want to blog or create podcasts or do kind of anything, create videos.
Yes, we're just at the beginning. And I am so excited by this. I mean, in addition to the Substacks and the Patreon and social media, I spend way too much of my time on YouTube. And there's just something going on in YouTube in the way that the speed and the acceleration at which people are coming up with a new idea, sharing it, and other people taking what they have figured out and then making improvements on it and sharing it. And it's just phenomenal. And it's not just in makeup tutorials and the guys in the garage. It's brain surgeons and it's people working in the highest tech. It's happening across the culture. And I think that and when it comes next with the augmented reality stuff, that combined with things like Patreon and the other tools of financing this bottom up sharing, this passion economy they sometimes call it, I think is very powerful. And I think we're just at the very, very beginnings of it.